Topic 20.
El área de lenguas extranjeras en el currículo. Criterios a reflejar en el proyecto educativo de centro y en el proyecto curricular de centro.
0. Introduction. When considering teaching foreign languages, findings on good practice show clearly that a large and invaluable amount of activity is taking place in respective creating the conditions for good practice at transnational, national, local and individual levels. Preparing students and teachers for good practice in teacher education. Supporting and exemplifying good practice through the creation of a languages-friendly environment at school and through a range of teaching techniques and materials. Disseminating ideas on good practice and language teaching to a wider audience. These include ideas for raising the profile of early languages learning in the public, political and educational mind. From the widely varying evidence, it is clear that good practice does not by itself constitute one conceptual methodology, but is better viewed as a repertoire of measures on which teachers can draw as appropriate. The European Commission, in the Promoting Language Learning and Linguistic Diversity, an Action Plan 2004-2006, 2003, has expressed its intent to extend, consolidate and develop the early learning of one or more foreign or additional languages in each of the EU member states. Accordingly to the Council of Europe General Orientations, the European Common Framework of Reference for the Teaching and Learning of Languages and the current educational laws in our country, some important changes have been set into the official national curriculum for primary education in Spain. These changes and the main guidelines for improving the communicative learning of foreign languages at compulsory educational levels will be widely described through this theme and linked to the curriculum contents and the curriculum documents which should be elaborated when designing the primary school program. This part of the curriculum design take into account the state legislation, such as the Royal Decree 126/2014 of 28 February which establishes the basic curriculum of primary education in Spain.
1. Educational organization in Spain. 1.1 The Spanish educational system. Compulsory primary education in Spain lasts 6 years, catering for children aged 6 to 12 years. Prior to the primary phase, pre-compulsory infant education is regarded as an integral part of the education system, although it remains optional for children. The 2002 Organic Law on the Quality of Education formalized preschool education into the above two cycles. The first cycle, for children up to 3 years of age, is concerned with the education and welfare of children. The purpose of the second cycle, infant education for 3 to 6-year-olds, is to care for the physical, intellectual, emotional, social and moral development of children. In most places the infant school is part of the primary school, which allows a smooth transition to primary education at the age of 6. There are 4 educational phases in the education system. Phase 1, pre-compulsory, infant, early years, education, to 6 years of age. Phase 2, compulsory primary education, aged 6 to 12 years. Phase 3, compulsory lower secondary education for 12 to 16-year-olds. Phase 4, upper secondary education, post-16. In terms of education, the Constitution identifies a series of areas over which the state has exclusive competence and others for which the autonomous communities may assume responsibility. An autonomous community assumes full powers over education when it takes over all the regulatory and executive responsibilities not included within the state's exclusive area of competence. Spain has recently completed this process of decentralization. By December 1999, all 17 autonomous communities had assumed full powers over education, under the coordination of the, then, Ministry of Education and Culture, MEC, at national level. The autonomous communities, amongst others, Oversee the implementation of the national standards defined at MECD level. Exercise all regulatory and executive powers involved in administering the education system in their respective regions, which have been devolved to them. Establish, authorize and operate public and private educational establishments and administer their personnel, construction, equipment, renovation and reform. Further develop, at regional level, the national guidelines for curricula. Conduct research. Process and grant subsidies to private education establishments. Administer scholarships and study grants. Curriculum. There are 3 levels of control of the curriculum, as follows. The official curriculum or basic curricular design, Royal Decree 126/2014 of February 28 for the National Official Curriculum for Primary Education, determined both at the national and the autonomous community level. The official curriculum sets out objectives in terms of skills, methodological principles, and content and assessment criteria. As we know, the competences in educational matters are assigned to the autonomous communities. So, the different educative administrations have to legislate an educative matter from the Royal Decree. So that, for ex-Maple, in Andalusia we will find the following legislation, Decree 97/2015, which establishes the organization and the curriculum of primary education in the autonomous region of Andalusia. The Order of March 2017-2015, which developed the curriculum of primary education in Andalusia. Decree 328/210, which validates the rules for organizations for schools. Law on Education in Andalusia. Specifically, in Annex 2 of Decree 97 we can find the development of the curriculum in Andalusia. There, it talks about foreign language areas, both the first foreign language and the second foreign language. B. Curricular plans define the actual curriculum which is delivered in school. They must state the educational aims for each of the different stages and levels, the content to be taught in each of them, as well as the methodological and assessment criteria. C. Class programs, in which the individual teacher adapts the school's curricular plan to meet the needs of the children in his/her class. Every teacher has some discretion for setting concrete standards for his/her class. Curriculum content. The statutory minimum core curriculum requirements specify that the following areas of knowledge must be studied at compulsory primary level, children aged 6 to 12 years. Spanish language and literature, and the co-official language and literature of the autonomous community. Mathematics. Natural science. Social science. Foreign languages, at least one. Social and civic values or religion. Physical education. Artistic education, plastic arts, music, dance, and drama. 1.2 Foreign languages and Spanish primary education. Under current reform proposals, the study of a foreign language will become compulsory nationwide from age 6, and it can be added a second foreign language in 5th or 6th grades whenever the autonomous communities authorized it. In addition to foreign languages, special emphasis is also being placed on the command of ICTs and cultural aspects, both especially related to foreign languages area of learning. The current educational law proposes a foreign languages teaching approach based on the orientations settled by the Council of Europe and the Modern Language Division in the Common European Framework of Reference for Learning, Teaching and Evaluation of the Languages, 2001. The main objective of teaching foreign languages in primary education in Spain is to facilitate the acquisition of students' communicative competence and specific competence, which includes not only talkative and expressive Skills that are useful to communicate in a foreign language, but rather they are also of vital importance for any other social activity, and for the student's learning general process. This implies considering approaches based on communication and focused on the acquisition and development of communicative competence and the several sub-competences which are involved in it: grammatical competence, discursive competence, sociolinguistic competence, strategic competence, and sociocultural competence. By means of developing their communicative competence, language learners are able to communicate and to interact. The area of learning of foreign languages contributes to the learner's global intellectual and social development, to their development as persons and citizens, members of a plurilingual and multicultural society. The basic principle derived of this position is the need to learn a language by using it in communicative contexts, which should be as much realistic as possible and meaningful for the learners. These communicative contexts should facilitate communicative language acts that imply the needing to communicate something to others and to interact with them as a mean of socializing with a real purpose. The learning contents are grouped into sections related with 4 learning contexts. Section 1: Oral comprehension, listening. Section 2: Oral expression and interaction, speaking. Section 3: Written comprehension, reading. Section 4: Written expression and interaction, writing. Assessment. Generally, all children are continually assessed during compulsory primary education by school-based classroom assessment, and the individual institution, whether it is state or private sector, is responsible for assessment and for awarding any relevant certification. The minimum core curriculum includes basic guidelines for assessment, which is regarded as an integral part of the curriculum. Assessment is expected to be global, covering the entire range of abilities set out in the general objectives for primary education and in the assessment criteria for the various areas of knowledge. Continuous, class teachers constantly gather information about the learning process of children. Formative, designed to regulate and guide the education process by providing a continual flow of information that enables improvements to be made both in the educational process and its results. Assessment at this level should also serve to determine any special needs attention required by children. The identification of any difficulties through assessment could result in the introduction of individual curricular adaptations, ACIs, for some. The teachings of primary education in Andalusia are based on the development of competences, according to the Order of March 2017, keys that make up the curriculum with an interdisciplinary approach that facilitates the realization of activities and tasks relevant, as well as the resolution of complex problems in contexts determined through learning significant, functional, and motivating factors, considering as cross-cutting elements the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms and the values that prepare students to assume a responsible life in a free and democratic society. For this reason, the foreign language area is a fundamental area to carry out the principles of globalization and interdisciplinarity between the different areas.
Two, foreign languages. General implications and criteria to be considered in primary education. 2.1. A language is used in situations. The National Curriculum for the Teaching of English in Spain, Royal Decree 126/2014 of February 28, refers to the fact that learners need English both for educational, vocational and recreational purposes. Spanish teachers/learners of English need therefore to be made aware of the importance of context for language use, and be prepared to adapt English to any given situation. In situations of foreign language use, there is often communication between people from different cultures. The curriculum stresses the need for learners to develop an awareness of the cultural context of the foreign language, and to get new insight not only into the foreign culture, but also into their own cultural background. Successful communication, it is said, depends not only on linguistic competence, but also on the ability to communicate across cultural differences. According to the national curriculum, the main goal for the teaching of English is to develop the students' ability to use English, and to stimulate them to interact with people from English-speaking in other cultures. The focus in the curriculum on the cultural dimension of the teaching of English corresponds with an increased awareness internationally of the link between language and culture. Research on the role of context for language use has led to the understanding that language and culture are in fact two sides of the same coin, and that teaching one without the other is no longer a feasible option. Focus has been put on the need for foreign language students to become aware of the cultural frames of reference that always constitute the backdrop for language use, both in one's native and in the foreign language. According to Annex I of the Order of March 17, Andalusia, as an autonomous community of Spain, is also committed as a member of the European Union in the promotion of knowledge of other community languages. The European Union, with the aim of promoting European citizens' awareness, has promoted a series of actions, among which is the agreement and concretion of a common linguistic policy to promote knowledge of other community languages. The Council of Europe and the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching, Evaluation, CEFR, establishes guidelines for both the learning of languages and the establishment of levels of development of communicative competence in different languages of a speaker. These guidelines have been the axis and guide in the development of the foreign language. 2.2 The Primary School. Foreign language learning begins with the main aim of developing language awareness, a general consciousness of linguistic phenomena, relationship with the native language or other languages present in the classroom environment. The focus here is on partial objectives concerned above all with an individual's general competences, discovery or recognition by the school of the plurality of languages and cultures, preparation for moving away from ethnocentrism, relativization, but also confirmation of the learner's own linguistic and cultural identity. Attention paid to body language and gestures, sound aspects, music and rhythm, experience of the physical and aesthetic dimensions of certain elements of another language, and their relationship with communicative competence, but without there being a structured and explicit attempt to develop this specific competence. The first foreign language starts with the emphasis on basic oral communication and a clearly predetermined linguistic content, with the aim of establishing the beginnings of a basic linguistic component, primarily phonetic and syntactic aspects, while promoting elementary oral interaction in class. Contribution of the foreign language area to the development of key competences by the Order of March 2017, 2015, which developed the curriculum of primary education in Andalusia. The linguistic areas, Spanish language and foreign languages, contribute to the development of all the key competences of the curriculum since they are privileged instruments for communication, insertion in society, expression of feelings, representation of the world and promotion of the creativity. The study of a foreign language contributes to the development of the competence in linguistic communication, completing, enriching and filling with new comprehensive and expressive nuances this general communicative capacity. The learning of a foreign language, based on the development of communication skills, will contribute to the development of this basic competence in the same sense as the first language does. Language is the main vehicle of human thought, the most powerful tool for the interpretation and representation of reality and the instrument of learning. It also makes the learning to learn competence in that it promotes reflection on one's own learning, so that each child identifies how they learn best and which strategies are most effective for them. In relation to this competence, the use of the European language portfolio will encourage your reflection on your own learning. So, the decisions that this reflection provokes autonomy and, in this sense, it can be affirmed that the foreign language also contributes to the development of the competition sense of initiative and entrepreneurial spirit. All of these competencies are currently in direct relation with the digital competence. Information and communication technologies offer the possibility of communicating in real time with any part of the world and also the simple and immediate access to an incessant flow of information that increases every day. The knowledge of a foreign language offers the possibility of communicating using it. And, most importantly, it creates real and functional communication contexts. This area contributes greatly to the development of social and civic competences. Languages serve speakers to communicate, but they are also a vehicle of cultural transmission. Learning a foreign language implies knowledge of traits and cultural facts linked to the different communities of speakers of it. This learning, well oriented from the school, must be translated both in the capacity and in the interest to know other cultures and to relate with other people, speakers, or apprentices of that language. At the same time, the knowledge of another language and cultural features different from their own contributes to the better understanding and appreciation of one's own language and culture, promotes respect, recognition, and acceptance of cultural differences, helping us to understand and appreciate both identity traits and differences. Finally, although to a lesser extent, this area collaborates in the development of the competence awareness and cultural expressions, if the linguistic models that are used contain, even with the limitations of this stage, linguistic productions as a cultural component. 2.3 Assessment. Assessment is described in this section in the sense of the assessment of the proficiency of the language user. Evaluation is a term which is again broader than assessment. All assessment is a form of evaluation, but in a language program a number of things are evaluated other than learner proficiency. These may include the effectiveness of particular methods or materials, the kind and quality of discourse actually produced in the program, learner/teacher satisfaction, teaching effectiveness, etc. Achievement assessment is the assessment of the achievement of specific objectives, assessment of what has been taught. It therefore relates to the week's/term's work, the course book, the syllabus. Achievement assessment is oriented to the course. It represents an internal perspective. Proficiency assessment, on the other hand, is assessment of what someone can do/knows in relation to the application of the subject in the real world. It represents an external perspective. Continuous assessment is assessment by the teacher and possibly by the learner of class performances, pieces of work and projects throughout the course. The final grade thus reflects the whole course/year/semester. Fixed point assessment is when grades are awarded and decisions made on the basis of an examination or other assessment which takes place on a particular day, usually the end of the course, or before the beginning of a course. What has happened beforehand is irrelevant. It is what the person can do now that is decisive. Formative assessment is an ongoing process of gathering information on the extent of learning, on strengths and weaknesses, which the teacher can feed back into their course planning, and the actual feedback they give learners. Formative assessment is often used in a very broad sense, so as to include non-quantifiable information from questionnaires and consultations. Summative assessment sums up attainment at the end of the course with a grade. It is not necessarily proficiency assessment. Indeed, a lot of summative assessment is norm-referenced, fixed-point, achievement assessment. We must take into account the order of November 4, 2015, which establishes the organization of the evaluation of the learning process of primary education students in the Autonomous Community of Andalusia. Article 3 talks about reference of the evaluation, such as a. The evaluation criteria and their concretion in evaluable learning standards, as they appear in the Annex I of the Order of March 17, 2015. B. The didactic programs that each educational center elaborates in accordance with the provisions of Article 7 of Decree 97/2015, of March 3. And Article 4 talks about evaluation procedures, techniques, and instruments. The teaching team will carry out the evaluation through the continuous observation of the evolution of the learning process of each student or of his personal maturation. To do this, you must use different procedures, techniques, and instruments adjusted to the evaluation criteria, as well as the specific characteristics of the students. Also, it is important is the evaluation of students with specific educational support needs. The evaluation of students with specific educational support needs will be governed by the principle of inclusion and ensure their non-discrimination and effective equality in access and permanence in the education system. Moreover, the teaching team must adapt the instruments for the evaluation of the students taking into account the specific needs of educational support presented. The evaluation and promotion of students with specific educational support needs with curricular adaptations will be the responsibility of the teaching team, with the advice of the orientation team of the center and under the coordination of the person who exercises tutoring. A significant curricular adaptation may be made to students with special educational needs whose level of curricular competence is lower, at least in 2 courses compared to the academic course in which they are enrolled. This adaptation will require that the psychopedagogical evaluation report of the student or student collect the proposed application of this measure. When the curricular adaptation is significant, the evaluation will be made taking as reference the objectives and evaluation criteria established in said adaptations, in accordance with the provisions of Article 18.3 of Decree 97/2015, of March 3. It will be specified that the positive qualification in the adapted areas refers to the overcoming of the evaluation criteria collected in their adaptation, and not to the specific ones of the academic course in which the student is enrolled. The specialist faculty will participate in the evaluation of students with special educational needs, in accordance with the applicable regulations regarding attention to diversity. Likewise, it will be taken into account for these students the shared tutoring referred to in the current regulations by which the attention to diversity is regulated. In the evaluation of students who join the education system late and who, due to serious deficiencies in the Spanish language, receive specific attention in this area, the reports that, for this purpose, the responsible teaching staff will elaborate will be taken into account of such attention. Finally, students enrolled in the course immediately below that which would correspond by age, referred to in Article 18.4 of Decree 97/2015, of March 3, may be included in the group corresponding to their age, provided that this circumstance produce before the end of the second quarter, when in the judgment of the person who exercises the tutoring, heard the teaching team and advised by the educational guidance team, has overcome the curriculum gap presented.
3. Foreign languages. The Common European Framework and main considerations to be reflected in the educational and curricular projects and in lesson planning. 3.1. The Common European Framework. The Common European Framework, which has been elaborated by the Modern Languages Division of the Council of Europe, 2001, provides a common basis for the elaboration of language syllabuses, curriculum guidelines, examinations, textbooks, etc. across Europe. It describes in a comprehensive way what language learners have to learn to do in order to use a language for communication and what knowledge and skills they have to develop so as to be able to act effectively. The description also covers the cultural context in which language is set. The framework also defines the levels of proficiency which allow learners' progress to be measured at each stage of learning and on a lifelong basis. The Common European Framework is intended to overcome the barriers to communication among professionals working in the field of modern languages arising from the different educational systems in Europe. It provides the means for educational administrators, course designers, teachers, teacher trainers, examining bodies, etc., to reflect on their current practice, with a view to situating and coordinating their efforts and to ensuring that they meet the real needs of the learners for whom they are responsible. By providing a common basis for the explicit description of objectives, content and methods, the framework will enhance the transparency of courses, syllabuses and qualifications, thus promoting international cooperation in the field of modern languages. The provision of objective criteria for describing language proficiency will facilitate the mutual recognition of qualifications gained in different learning contexts, and accordingly will aid European mobility. 3.2 Plurilingualism. In recent years, the concept of plurilingualism has grown in importance in the Council of Europe's approach to language learning. Plurilingualism differs from multilingualism, which is the knowledge of a number of languages, or the coexistence of different languages in a given society. The plurilingual approach emphasizes the fact that as an individual person's experience of language in its cultural contexts expands, from the language of the home to that of society at large and then to the languages of other peoples, whether learnt at school or college, or by direct experience, he or she does not keep these languages and cultures in strictly separated mental compartments, but rather builds up a communicative competence to which all knowledge and experience of language contributes and in which languages interrelate and interact. In different situations, a person can call flexibly upon different parts of this competence to achieve effective communication with a particular interlocutor. For instance, partners may switch from one language or dialect to another, exploiting the ability of each to express themselves in one language and to understand the other, or a person may call upon the knowledge of a number of languages to make sense of a text, written or even spoken, in a previously unknown language, recognizing words from a common international store in a new guise. From this perspective, the aim of language education is profoundly modified. It is no longer seen as simply to achieve mastery of one or two, or even three languages, each taken in isolation, with the ideal native speaker as the ultimate model. Instead, the aim is to develop a linguistic repertoire, in which all linguistic abilities have a place. This implies, of course, that the languages offered in educational institutions should be diversified and students given the opportunity to develop a plurilingual competence. Furthermore, once it is recognized that language learning is a lifelong task, the development of a young person's motivation, skill and confidence in facing new language experience out of school comes to be of central importance. The responsibilities of educational authorities, qualifying examining bodies and teachers cannot simply be confined to the attainment of a given level of proficiency in a particular language at a particular moment in time, important though that undoubtedly is. 3.3 An action-oriented approach. A comprehensive, transparent and coherent frame of reference for language learning, teaching and assessment must relate to a very general view of language use and learning. The approach proposed by the CEFRL, generally speaking, is an action-oriented one insofar as it views users and learners of a language primarily as social agents, i.e. members of society who have tasks, not exclusively language-related, to accomplish in a given set of circumstances, in a specific environment and within a particular field of action. While acts of speech occur within language activities, these activities form part of a wider social context, which alone is able to give them their full meaning. We speak of tasks insofar as the actions are performed by one or more individuals strategically using their own specific competencies to achieve a given result. The action-based approach therefore also takes into account the cognitive, emotional and volitional resources and the full range of abilities specific to and applied by the individual as a social agent. Accordingly, any form of language use and learning could be described as follows: competencies are the sum of knowledge, skills and characteristics that allow a person to perform actions. General competencies are those not specific to language, but which are called upon for actions of all kinds, including language activities. Communicative language competencies are those which empower a person to act using specifically linguistic means. Context refers to the constellation of events and situational factors, physical and others, both internal and external to a person, in which acts of communication are embedded. Language activities involve the exercise of one's communicative language competence in a specific domain in processing, receptively and/or productively, one or more texts in order to carry out a task. Language processes refer to the chain of events, neurological and physiological, involved in the production and reception of speech and writing. Text is any sequence or discourse, spoken and/or written, related to a specific domain and which in the course of carrying out a task becomes the occasion of a language activity, whether as a support or as a goal, as product or process. Domain refers to the broad sectors of social life in which social agents operate. A higher-order categorization has been adopted here, limiting these to major categories relevant to language learning, teaching and use: the educational, occupational, public and personal domains. A strategy is any organized, purposeful and regulated line of action chosen by an individual to carry out a task which he or she sets for himself or herself or with which he or she is confronted. A task is defined as any purposeful action considered by an individual as necessary in order to achieve a given result in the context of a problem to be solved, an obligation to fulfill or an objective to be achieved. This definition would cover a wide range of actions such as moving a wardrobe, writing a book, obtaining certain conditions in the negotiation of a contract, playing a game of cards, ordering a meal in a restaurant, translating a foreign language text or preparing a class newspaper through group work. According to Article 27 of Decree 328 in Andalusia, teachers should formulate the corresponding area curricular projects, which serve as a guide to carry out the teaching-learning process. These projects have different parts, objectives, Contents. Methodology. Evaluation. Organization, space and time. Tasks. Attention to diversity. Values. 3.4 Errors and mistakes. Errors are due to an interlanguage, a simplified or distorted representation of the target competence. When the learner makes errors, his performance truly accords with his competence, which has developed characteristics different from those of L2/FL norms. Mistakes, on the other hand, occur in performance when a user, learner, as might be the case with a native speaker, does not bring his competencies properly into action. Different attitudes may be taken to learner errors, according to the European Common Framework. A. Errors and mistakes are evidence of failure to learn. B. Errors and mistakes are evidence of inefficient teaching. C. Errors and mistakes are evidence of the learner's willingness to communicate despite risks. D. Errors are an inevitable, transient product of the learner's developing interlanguage. E. Mistakes are inevitable in all language use, including that of native speakers. The action to be taken with regard to learner mistakes and errors may be: A. All errors and mistakes should be immediately corrected by the teacher. B. Immediate peer correction should be systematically encouraged to eradicate errors. C. All errors should be noted and corrected at a time when doing so does not interfere with communication, e.g. by separating the development of accuracy from the development of fluency. D. Errors should not be simply corrected, but also analyzed and explained at an appropriate time. E. Mistakes, which are mere slips, should be passed over, but systematic errors should be eradicated. F. Errors should be corrected only when they interfere with communication. G. Errors should be accepted as transitional interlanguage and ignored. 3.5 Special Education Needs, SEN. In the field of foreign languages, a major emphasis within the acquisition of communicative competence is educational provision for all, which leads towards each citizen having some competence in at least 2 community languages. Access to educational opportunities in foreign languages is part of the social dimension of European integration, and a means for the individual to benefit from occupational and personal opportunities. In addition, access to foreign language learning at school is directly linked to the promotion of lifelong learning and European citizenship. Individuals are protected from any discriminatory practice on grounds including disability and genetic features, which would exclude them from such access. Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union 2001, Article 21. Thus, we may assume that all young people in the European Union, whatever their disability, whether educated in mainstream or segregated schools streams, have equal rights to foreign languages education according to provision of opportunity and resources in their respective environments. Ensuring full access to foreign language learning is fundamentally an issue of responding to diversity. Scientific knowledge on cognition and learning, an insight into individual learning styles, has advanced considerably in recent years. In addition, the teaching profession has focused on designing methodologies so that language learning suits a range of diverse language learning styles. The foundation of good foreign language teaching practice rests on responding to the diverse language learning styles of the individual. This applies to all learners regardless of age, ability or disability. Recent good practice in SEN has led to the development of Individual Educational Plans, IEP. The IEP has been given special prominence during the shift towards inclusion of SEN pupils into mainstream education. The IEP allows those responsible for the individual, and the individual him/herself, to design an adapted educational plan specific to the person's abilities and disabilities. Quality foreign language teaching practice for pupils with SEN requires methodologies which are equally good for non-SEN pupils alongside specific interventions according to the profile of attitudes, aptitudes, and needs in the individual's IEP. Across the board, these methods require enhanced multisensory input and adaptive support. In Andalusia, attention to diversity has been legislated from 2 rules. First, the Order of July 25, 2008, regulating the attention to the diversity of the students who study basic education in the public teaching centers of Andalusia. And then, instructions of March 8, 2017, of the General Direction of Participation and Equity, about the detection and identification protocol of the pupil with specific support needs education and organization of the educational response. The aim of teaching foreign languages to pupils with special needs goes beyond preparing him/her to have a specific level of communicative competence in order to use a target language in professional and personal life. SEN pupils can and do achieve high levels of foreign language competence, but there are those who do not. However, these lower-level achievers are able to achieve other benefits relating to personal and educational development, alongside possible modest linguistic achievements. To encourage a pupil to bypass foreign language learning because of low foreign language communicative performance expectations is to deny him/her access to these benefits which link directly to European citizenship. Pupils with special needs are only one part of the diversity jigsaw to which the foreign language learning systems will need to further adapt, leading to benefits for all. 3.6 Central Linguistic Project and the Integrated Language Curriculum. In order to improve the communicative competence of students from all areas, the Centre's Linguistic Project, PLC, has emerged. This document frames the integration of the languages in the center and the agreements taken for the development of the linguistic competence of the students from all the areas of the curriculum, being therefore at the service of the integral educational development of the students. It is advisable in the primary education stage to design a center language project that combines objectives and methodology, and to coordinate a common task, at least every school year, in order to work the skills of the communicative competence in all areas. In addition, from the Centre's linguistic project, the integration of the teaching of all languages is favored as if they were variants of the same teaching. That is the objective of the integrated language curriculum. The Integrated Language Curriculum, CIL, aims for all languages to be taught as one. The students are continually exposed to the teaching of languages that turn their backs on one another.
4. Theme Overview. In Spain, after the proposals derived from the latest educational reform and from the Council of Europe educational orientations, some changes have been made into the primary curriculum to implement the importance of beginning to learn foreign languages at early ages, officially in the first course of primary education, although in infant education they have the first contact with the foreign language. If children are to pick up English in a natural way, their early classroom experience should be essentially in English, and language should ideally be acquired in a similar way to the bilingual child, with the teacher taking a similar role to the bilingual parent. This means learning the foreign language through the learning process itself in a communicative way. At primary stage, according to the national curriculum, children are learning to communicate, to learn to live with others in harmony, to interact confidently, to know about the world and life, to respond to stimuli, to control their responses, to use their different forms of intelligence creatively, to play and to work together in harmony. The key to primary FL learning is knowledge of language and linguistic culture, songs, rhymes, games, routines, social skills, etc., of how children acquire language, and of the general curriculum in all areas, experience and enthusiasm, of early learning in general, your own, your colleagues and your pupils, young learner-friendly environment, both physical, classroom and equipment, and effective, a teacher who brings confidence, affection, security, interest and enjoyment to learning, and who respects each child's learning process and rhythm. Finally, we can list the items which characterize a good elementary school in foreign language teaching. The foreign language is used almost exclusively. Classroom activities involve meaningful and purposeful language use. The environment is child-centered and instructional experiences are developmentally appropriate. The content of the elementary school curriculum is integrated with language learning. The target culture is an integral part of instruction and is coordinated with the social studies program. Methodological guidelines. The axis of the foreign language area is constituted by the procedures aimed at achieving an effective oral and written communicative competence in significant social contexts that allow expressing oneself with progressive effectiveness and correction, and that encompasses all possible uses and registers. The methodology of this area should focus on the student, on their learning needs, prioritizing a communicative approach through the game, especially in the first years, and the performance of joint tasks such as project work, research, etc. It is essential for the acquisition of the linguistic competence, both in foreign language and in the mother tongue, the development of the reading ability and the mastery of writing, which, preferably, will be worked simultaneously and coordinated in the two areas, thus setting the basis for all students to master the oral and written skills at the same time in all the languages under study. Presenting the oral language in advance to the written form will reduce the interference of the sound-writing relationship of the mother tongue by improving the comprehension of the language. Thus, one of the most interesting techniques to present new vocabulary is through flashcards or cards, which will not only be useful to introduce new vocabulary but also to review it, create stories and contexts, stimulate discussions, etc. With the younger students, the phonics method or the phonetic method will be very useful to learn the correct pronunciation of the words, the interpretation of the sounds of each syllable before approaching the adequate reading of a text in a foreign language. After the acquisition of basic reading skills, we can proceed to reading in the form of poetry, music, tongue twisters, etc. The teacher will design activities and tasks that reinforce communication, the need to create real contexts even if they are simulated, dialogues, presentations, active listening in different contexts, reading different types of text, writing to communicate with others to achieve different purposes, oral presentations, exhibitions of work carried out by the students, integrated curriculum activities with other areas, celebration of ephemerides, etc. They are examples of communicative tasks and/or projects in the linguistic field. Write and edit personal or collective books, stories, poems, sayings, monographs on a topic, make a newspaper, a radio program, an audio-visual news, organize and participate in debates on topics of interest to the community, Web 2.0, blogs, wikis, WebQuest, forums, chats, etc. prepare and represent a play, itineraries, travel guides, tourist guides of the locality, prepare a presentation to expose it in class or outside of it, design a poster with the rules of coexistence of a group, course or center, for an advertising campaign, to keep the school clean, against gender violence, racism, exchange with students from another location, another province, another community, another country, develop a code for responsible use of television or internet at home, write letters to the city council, the press, the entities and associations of the environment to express opinions or request something, etc. Other communicative tasks can be, make surveys on different topics of interest and publicize the results in different media and/or formats.